All right, welcome to another episode of Safer Communities Canada. We are really excited for this conversation today. I'm your co-host, Dr. Ardavan Izadarad, YAAACE Executive Director. Here's my partner,
Devon Jones, YAAACE Founding Director.
Yeah, and today we're really blessed to have Mr. Scott McKean in the house. I'm going to give you a high-level summary of his extensive resume, and then we're going to get his story really throughout the questions, as always, with our guests. So Scott is currently implementing SafeTO, City of Toronto's Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and also supporting the Ministry of Attorney General's Justice Center programs in the City of Toronto. We're going to kind of talk about those and break it down. But Scott works to enhance community safety and reduce vulnerability for people, families, and places in Toronto's neighborhoods. While at the City of Toronto, Scott has led and supported the development and implementation of many strategies and initiatives, such as the Community Crisis Response Program, Focus Toronto Spider, Youth Violence Prevention, Toronto Strong Neighborhood Strategy, and many more. We just don't have the time to list it, but rest assured, he's a well-known face in the community safety space with all the stakeholders. And prior to joining the City of Toronto, Scott worked in the community sector where he developed a number of programs and services for young people and developed the support model for the Out of the Cold Emergency Program. And outside of work, he has many talents, including painting pictures and playing drums. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Well, we'll just get right into it. We always try to get our listeners to connect and know the story of our guests. So maybe tell us a little about your journey. Like, how did you gravitate towards the community safety space? What it motivated you? What inspired you? Walk us through that.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me here today. To be honest, I don't have a traditional journey. So I have my own background and, early on, kind of my entry point into this kind of work was I was working for myself as an artist, and I painted pictures and murals, and also playing drums and percussion in a number of bands, and playing live music in various spaces. And at one point, I would always kind of take money I made and try to do other things. And I've opened a number of businesses, and some of them are very successful and some of them weren't. And one part, things went south in one business, and I was just trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I started an art program, and that program was working with young people in various communities, including within Jane and Finch, but all over the city with a focus on downtown core. And I was teaching art, and I developed a graffiti program and connected with a lot of young people, more than I expected to. And so turned that into, a bit of a, sort of weekly affair in different spaces. And, the kind of young people that I was attracting and getting connected to, were engaged in things that, were causing problems. And when you're connected to young people who are involved in potentially involved in criminal activity, inevitably you either lose them to gun violence or the criminal justice system. So it was imperative for me to be able to support them and their families to really understand trauma and to start connecting with families. And that was kind of my entry point in. From there, was hired by a local agency and did some work, in the sort of youth outreach worker space or gang exit space.
Yeah.
Then I was eventually hired by Dixon Hall, which is a community-based agency in Regent Park. Nation Chung and Kenneth Slater and Sandra Costain hired me and gave me a shot, which was great. And I did lots of work there. And then I ended up getting involved in some of the work with homeless individuals in the city. And eventually Dixon Hall hired me to lead the development and implementation of the Out of the Cold program, which is an emergency program that partners with faith communities to provide emergency shelter for individuals during the winter months, and meals for folks, and just sense of community. So I was doing that for quite some time, and then took a break from that I left doing this work for a bit, and I started a music magazine, went back into the music space, and developed some, with my friend. It was called Soundproof Magazine, and we developed an imprint magazine, took it online, developed content internationally. We had 150 writers around the world, developed all the Canadian Music Hall of Fame content. We had a content development company. We wrote music news for all of the major publications. And then I was missing this work. And at that time, the City of Toronto was looking for someone to, sort of develop and implement the Community Crisis Response Program. And I was hired as the supervisor. I worked with a well-known person named Stephen Linton and Sal Hanadi, and we started the Community Crisis Response Program, and then brought in Serena Officer and Jesse Singh, Sandra Demota, and grew it up. And then I worked on all those programs that you just mentioned. But, for me, it was untraditional because I didn't go to school for this. I was an artist, and I treated this work as a creative endeavor, and, and pursued it through being an entrepreneur. And that's how I've done my work since I've started.
Well, you know what? I mean, I think it's beautiful because there's a lot of transferable skills given your background with art and music and just kind of creating that symphony and bringing pieces together. And sometimes you have to be creative because I think sometimes in this space, we need innovative solutions. And I think maybe that's an important mindset you bring to the projects that you led. My segue question was, how did you meet and collaborate with Devon Jones? What's the story behind that? And hopefully it's PG rated.
Well, I'm not sure. Let's see who wants to go first. I think I met Devon Jones doing this work, and facilitating the Community Crisis Response Program. So in the beginning, it was a really small program. There was like myself and 2 other people. And so in addition to supervising it, I was always out in communities and working across the city. And I met Devon doing that work, and, first as a teacher and hearing about the experiences and, the work that Devon was doing here, and then YAAACE and the programs that were happening. And I read his report before, so we had a mutual understanding, and, sat with Devon many times in his classroom and give me the unofficial, real official history of the Jane Finch community, and is very inspiring to me. And so kind of met through that. We've had, great things that we've done together over the years, and we've lost some people, and we've had friends who were victims that we had to collaboratively work and very late night phone calls and try to figure stuff out. And so it's kind of just been through doing the work, but I don't know if you want to add to that, Devon.
Yeah. I mean, I really want to say firstly that, the work that Scott has done in this space over the years is exemplary, and it's we have to give him his flowers while he's here.
No, it's okay. I don't need any.
Come on, accept my roses, Scott.
Thank you.
But I mean, and when we're off camera, I was saying that we're dealing with a very dynamic phenomenon that requires you to pivot constantly and adjust and rethink strategies and restructure ideas that you're so embedded in, and you do that extremely, extremely well. So we applaud your work, and we applaud your commitment to safer communities, and in particular safer Black communities, because we know that's the issue of gun violence is a pariah in our community, and you've been a staunch advocate around ensuring that our communities are safe. So we applaud, we appreciate that, so
thank you.
But as it relates to, I think we met a little further back. I think I met you at Redemption when Victor was there. So I think we're interacting at that point with yourself and Stephen. So
Redemption is if we're giving flowers, shout out to Victor Beausoleil.
Man.
Greatest, one of the greatest programs the city's ever seen. Yeah. I was on the board, still champion that way of thinking and initiative to this day. Definitely.
I agree. Yeah. And I know we have a number of questions that we have laid out. And my question is, working in this community and, traversing institutions and so on, there is a huge issue around the disproportionality, of Black violence, victimization, and perpetration. The fact is that Black folks make up 4% of the population in this country, but we're victimized at the rate of 15% of homicides. We make up 5% of the population provincially, but 15% of 25% of homicide victimization. What are some approaches you think we can take to address this issue that is very much so disproportionately impacting Black communities?
Well, I think we should probably switch the question, and I'll ask you the question. I mean, first of all, I don't think we can ask that question without just the significance of that and how important what you just asked me is, and all of the work that I do, and centering, the equity and the priority on Black communities when we think about this issue. And within the position that I'm in, and with what I've learned over the years, that's where we have to simultaneously bring investment to community and invest in organizations that are deeply connected and have pathways into the folks that are vulnerable to violence or committing it or at the center of it.
Yeah.
And the other part is ensuring that the systems align around that. So the first part for me is being honest about it and naming it, and that's like, from my perspective, where the city of Toronto is, as we have the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit, it's the first of its kind to prioritize confronting anti-Black racism, which leads to the disproportionate impact on Black communities. So that's one side of it. But throughout the design and implementation of SafeTO, communities gave us a mandate as a city to, look and apply an all systems approach to how we deal with gun violence in the city, to look across the spectrum of prevention, early intervention, or intervention or interruption work, and some of the work that you're leading through towards peace, for example, and then the response and recovery and the healing, and take all of that and whatever we learn to fuel sort of longer term social development, like poverty reduction, workforce development. So in doing that, the other thing communities talked to us about was we need to center the communities that are most impacted in how we mobilize and how we actually maneuver the ways that we do, and center the lived experiences of young Black people, and specifically young Black men, young Black families, young Black men, and specifically in what we do, because they are the most disproportionately impacted by the issue of gun violence. And so as we've been building out, we've been, doing that. We've been investing. So we invest in Towards Peace. We invest in YAAACE and Think Twice. And within that model, we invest in youth violence prevention programs, again in YAAACE, but in a number of other agencies and organizations. Again, we're just on the verge of launching a lived experience advisory table.
Yeah, and shout out to KIP, Kids of Incarcerated Parents, because that's who we're doing our diversion program with through the
100%
prevention grant.
100%. And, and taking a lens and applying it to the interventions in themselves. And so can the city or, the province or, the governments, prioritize the needs of Black communities? We can do it from a policy perspective, but we can't operationalize it without folks on the ground that are deeply connected to the neighborhoods and the communities that we ought to be serving in any issue, in this case, gun violence.
And I got to follow up to that, because you speak, I think, of a very important point. I know me and Dee always talk about all the work that happens behind the scenes that people don't see. So for example, for folks that don't know, obviously YAAACE is leading the Towards Peace program, which is a violence interruption and intervention program in the Gin and Finch community. We got Think Twice doing it in Rexdale. We're very excited. We got the Scarborough site getting up and running this year. Maybe walk us through kind of the behind the scenes advocacy that was required to get Towards Peace up and running.
Well, I mean, like anything that's happened in our city, it's steps of evolution, you know? So if I can take it for when I entered the equation, so there was the Summer of the Gun, and that led to a whole new way of thinking, some great investments by United Way, the Youth Challenge Fund, which led to redemption reintegration services and many other initiatives. And that there was some momentum. And, you know, as you said, you know, one thing you appreciate about me is, but us as a system, we have to consistently adapt and evolve. Yeah,
definitely.
And maybe that didn't happen. The adapting and evolving didn't happen as much as it could have. And we did some good work. But there became a time where we needed to do something different. And, you know, through the early stages of the thinking of SafeTO and through significant community advocacy. So, you know, we started with, you know, the Community Crisis Response Program. We launched the Focus Program that was premised on some of the work that was happening in Glasgow around violence reduction, some work that was happening in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. We talked to folks in Oakland, you know, with the Office to Prevent Violence that they launched there, have several interactions with New York and their Office for, you know, Criminal Justice and that work. And so we've been, you know, sort of building and learning. And so when it came to the opportunity to present Towards Peace, it was that community was asking us about violence interruption models and wanting to make sure that we, again, centered people who were disproportionately impacted in the response and the interruption of violence and empowered communities to do that. So then, you know, it became about talking to communities. It became about researching and building a business case, which we put a report forward to council about Towards Peace, and, you know, had conversations with, like, you know, community folks, the political side, that led to the investment in like Toronto City Council's investment in Towards Peace. And from there, then, you know, it became part of the city structure in which we heard from community. We invested in some, you know, some community researchers about what it meant to have a model like this in Toronto. And then, you know, emerging from that process, you know, came the investment in, you know, in YAAACE and in Think Twice. And that's where we are now. You know, and now you're bringing your expertise and all of the people that you've engaged to build out the model and develop it further. And so it's kind of like an evolution, and it's basically trying to listen to community, look at where we're at, look at the resources that we have available or don't have available, and try to develop a way to get there. And that's essentially what we all kind of have played a part in.
Yeah, Scott, when you say you had to make a business case, what did that look like?
Well, so essentially it's research about the issue. So researching the issue, here's what, you know, here's what the issue is, and here's what we're hearing from communities as potential ways to address that. And then looking at, you know, what it would cost to do something like this. And then also looking at, you know, the city's role in supporting that. And so then our version of presenting that are council reports, not the most exciting or engaging documents.
And I read a couple of those leading up to the Towards Peace model, kind of, as you said, the best practices from around the world, impact. So
yeah, so it's about presenting, here's the path that we're hearing from communities that's important, and here's how we want to mobilize to support community to help build this out.
Okay. Yeah. You got a question, or you want me to take the next one?
I always have a question.
He's a full-time critical thinker.
100%.
You know, Scott, the issue of polarization is an ugly reality in our community.
Yeah.
The issue around get back killings and I mean, we've lost so many young people to this phenomenon with
Rest in peace.
Now, you know, music and social media become an accelerant to this phenomenon. I mean, the mandate of Towards Peace is in the city of Toronto's mandate around interruption is a critical stage. How do you think we can best engage other stakeholders, such as the province and the federal government, to address this very urgent issue that's taking place in community? Because I say that because at the province, there isn't any level, any entity responsible for this issue, and there is no traction there. At the federal level, public safety is a departmental plan that excludes the urgency of this matter. So how best can we speak to this? How can the city who, with people like yourself, and I used the word fluid and dynamic to describe the way you work earlier, because you're pivoting and you're moving in real time as the issues persist, the city's evolving and moving, but we're not seeing that from the province and the federal government. How can we get them to buy in and see the sense of urgency so this issue don't continue to proliferate and get worse?
Well, I think that's where it takes all of us to come together. So, one of the things that I've been building out that is an action of SafeTO is the Toronto Office to Prevent Violence. And it actually is in response to the kind of collaboration and your earlier question about centering what's important. We had to do some work in the system to be able to build some backbone infrastructure to ensure that we could do, as like system players, the kind of collaboration that community wants to do. So within that, we now have like literally embedded staff from multiple institutions and dedicated leads from all of the partners. And so that includes Toronto Community Housing, it includes the Toronto District School Board, it includes the Toronto Police Service, and the TTC, for example. And it also has dedicated leads from the Toronto Catholic District School Board, the Ministries of Solicitor General, the Ministry of Attorney General, and the Ministry of Children Community Social Services. And so the next phase is to build in the Lived Experience Advisory Committee. We've also when we talk about SafeTO is an overarching plan, and it has multiple interventions in them, Towards Peace being one of them. So you're actively advancing SafeTO, and the work that you do informs how we move. And then, in addition to that is, as we build this Toronto Office to Prevent Violence, for example, you would have noticed from your contract around the youth violence prevention grants, you're now connected to the Toronto Office to Prevent Violence. So inherently, we built this infrastructure that's all connected. The next step is to bring us all together and to deal with so that's the long-term piece. To deal with the urgency of right now, as part of Towards Peace, there is the eVibe model. And, young people informing us about what's going online. That's one component to that. There is a number of other entities that are looking at the social media space. And the urgency for me is this, and I'm sure my parents said this about like television or whatever, but, there are inequities that you talked about up front that, drive divides in our communities. And if those inequities, they manifest in different ways, and if they're left unattended to, we know that it can result in challenges. But in a virtual world, someone can participate equitably in a space that they've never been able to. And if they position themselves in that space as being hard or tough or whatever the lingo is right now. What I'm seeing within the work is that people will defend that virtual persona with in a very real way in the real world. And if you think about that in another level, it's almost as if the virtual persona becomes more important than an individual's personality. So we have a deeper intervention as a system to move forward and sort of work with young people who are engaging in those spaces and look at what that looks like. So then you take that up a level and to get right to the core of your question, which is about retaliation. It's very real. It's happening. So we need to work with young people to break that open. all of us old folks,
Yeah.
we can develop policies, we can develop positions, but it's no different than, you know, back in the day when you had to ride over to the other neighborhood on your bike and, you know, pop someone in the jaw or get popped in the jaw.
Yeah.
You know, but except it's happening in real time with the world watching. And it also is a revenue generation source. So we have to really like pick that apart with young people who are at the center of it. It's the only way we can deal with it.
It's very informative, and thank you for that. I want to shift to kind of maybe focus on youth a little bit, because, you know, at YAAACE, we do serve a large population of youth. Some of them justice involved, and some of them from a prevention, family support lens, through our new narrative and Towards Peace program. So, you know, you've been integral with the development of the Ministry of Attorney General's Justice Center program in the city of Toronto. And for folks who are not familiar, you know, the YCGA, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, you know, it's meant to be very proactive in finding ways to deter youth or giving them a second chance before getting to a punitive way of kind of sentencing them. So for those who don't know nothing about the Youth Justice Center, can you give us a really high-level summary of how does it work from when the youth is charged to when they go through these courts, and some of the community organizations you work with? You know, we're really honored, you know, through your involvement. You know, we recently just came to an agreement to kind of support some of the youth that are going through the West Justice Centers, to give them access to robotics and athletics from a strength-based lens. So walk us through this Youth Justice Centers for someone who has no idea about it, never heard of it. How does it work?
Well, before I get into like the mechanics of it, so I'm a City of Toronto employee, but I am embedded in the Ministry of Attorney General's Justice Center team. So it's, again, a cross-government integration that's making that work. And there's a dedicated team that's led out of the Ministry of Attorney General that's focused on that. And so in Toronto, there's two models. The Downtown East, which I won't get into, it's outside of scope, but it's focused on individuals who are chronic reoffenders who experience at the intersection of poverty, homelessness, mental health, addictions, and that's the reason for their reoffending. The Toronto Northwest has a couple of different focuses. The first is that it really zeroes in on all young people from an early intervention standpoint, because as we know, if young people get involved in the criminal justice system, if we don't mobilize and look at what the root is of why they're offending in the first place, they're going to keep coming back. And we don't want that. So that's essentially what it is. And the other thing is, how do you, within the justice system, really embed culturally responsive principles and practices in serving the young people that we do. And so the Justice Center is a court model, and in the Northwest, it deals with all out of custody cases involving young people. And so,
and when we say young, we just want to clarify.
Yeah, so 12 to 17.
Thank you.
Thank you. Within the Youth Criminal Justice Act that you mentioned. So ages between 12 to 17. And so all individuals charged in the Northwest, which is across 6 different police divisions, they, like, what we're doing is there's a component called the Enhanced First Appearance Pilot. So what was happening historically were young people were getting charged, and their first appearance wasn't for, a month or two later. And so they were reoffending before the first charge was there. And so now there's expedited practices, and they're immediately connected to a case manager, community case manager, who does a needs assessment and intake assessment as part of the court process, and works with the within the justice system to develop an individual plan with that young person and their family that is presented to the court. And there's a dedicated crown within the court. There's dedicated duty counsel, and there's victim supports for anyone who's been involved. And so it's about wraparound supports. The second component is we know that engagement in the criminal justice system can significantly impact education. Yeah. So within the program, there's an education advocate that is working with the boards to ensure that young people can maintain their participation in schools. Further to that, there's a forensic psychologist that's there as well. And so a number of wraparound services. And then we've worked with a community-based agency called Delta to develop the Maradone program, which is really a Afrocentric approach to dealing with young people who have committed certain types of offenses. And we use certain type of offenses as an indicator that there could be a pathway to violence. And so we try to specifically intervene or interrupt, using your language, those offenses. And so it's a really holistic court model that's aiming to make connections to deal with some of the issues that may have resulted in the young person coming to court in the first place.
And some of the court can happen through an online medium, or is it always in person?
No, it happens virtually. So the court days are virtual, and we have satellite locations. So in the Toronto Northwest, a young person can attend court from their school, from home with their parents, or they can attend a place and be with their case manager. So the Rexdale Hub is one location, and the Luminous site at Dufferin and Finch or Keele and Finch is the second location.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that breakdown, because I think it's a very innovative solution that we need more of it, particularly when we're talking about, prevention and avoiding folks getting caught in that cycle of reoffending. And we know what it means when someone gets a record. It becomes another layer, another systemic barrier to employment and housing, which can be key risk factors.
Well, we're excited to partner with YAAACE on it now too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Definitely.
Okay, I'll throw another curveball at you. We've been asking a lot of serious questions, so just to maybe light it up a bit. What does community safety mean to Scott today in 2024? That might have been different 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So what 3 words or ideas come to your mind when you think of community safety?
Well, community and well-being, are the ones that I would say. If you want the 3 words, community, safety, well-being. That's it.
Okay, well, break those down. What does that mean to you?
Well, for me, it's like kind of what we talked about earlier. So number one, community are places. It's groups of individuals. It comes in all shapes and sizes. The safety aspect really is historically was thought about, crime and really the response to crime and people's perceptions of crime. But we know from years of doing this work and the great work that you've done that if you're not going to center the well-being of people and places and look at the inequities that potentially, if not attended to, could manifest, then they will become safety issues. Yeah. And so you can't think about one without the other.
And how do you build that thinking into the decision-making involved in SafeTO? So how do you really make sure community perspectives or folks with a lived experience have a seat at the table? Because, working within the city, it's still quite a bit of a hierarchy. But I think, in your entrepreneur way, you do a great job of trying to blur that or make it a bit more of a horizontal sharing of power. So how do you navigate that? Because I think sometimes that can be a challenge.
Well, I think the first thing is like, we use terms in this work, like, red tape, for example. And if I can find the red tape factory, I'm going to blow it up. So, you all have to take me down. But the other thing is at the table.
Yeah.
And there's no mythical table. Like there's no destination table where this is it. This is like the back room where all this stuff happens.
Yeah.
The table really is multiple places, and it could be tables, it could be a program like you. The reporting you submit to the city, it actually gets used. When we're in meetings, we're actually listening and taking back and trying to refine in real time. We have, like I said, we're just about to launch a lived experience advisory around the gun violence work. There's community safety networks that people participate in. We're going to go to a meeting tonight with a bunch of community folks. Yeah. There's a number of different spaces that people get to participate and that all gets funneled in different ways to different places of the system that can advance change. And so ensuring that it's there is being in those spaces, listening, and bringing things back and trying to keep the dialogue. And when we can, bringing people together in different ways, and so we've done that in a number of different ways. Just in January, youth violence prevention programs such as yourselves, and principals from the Northwest.
Yeah.
We wanted to have a conversation, so we brought everyone in the room, and now we're developing plans to sustain that and build that forward. And there'll be ongoing evolutions about what that looks like, but there's no one place. There's multiple places.
And that's great. I like the way you broke that down, because sometimes we can get caught up in that mode of thinking. And really, like you're saying, if you do a little bit of the work everywhere, then you start feeling that collective impact.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Pass it on to you.
Yeah, the piece around, or the dichotomy between prevention and intervention. It's an interesting one. As a teacher who has taught school for so long, for over so many years, I would have that young person in front of me who I know, or they're in your school and based on the environment and based on what you're seeing, it's not if, but when. What does prevention look like for that very volatile cohort of young people who they're accessible, they're young, they're in middle school, they're in early high school? What does prevention look like for that cohort of students? And how can we best ensure that we get to them as a collective and as a collaborative? How can we ensure that they don't slip through the cracks anymore, and we have access to them, and we can put meaningful structures around them to mitigate what looks like the inevitable?
And if I may add to that, like I think of like, how does the cycle of a politician complicate things? Because you need votes within 2 years, 4 years, and prevention seats take a bit of a longer time to sometimes blossom. I think of post Jordan Manners, the Tavis initiative, putting
you complicate my question,
putting police into schools.
You
but
complicate my question. Ask the man a very complex question, and you're complicating my complex question. Let the man answer my question.
It's okay. No, I mean, I would say, like, I can give my answer, which I will. Yeah. I would ask you, how do you do that? You asked me, like, how do you get to that cohort?
It's kind of like you get to that cohort by ensuring that you put structures in place, you get them involved in programming, you micromanage their academic trajectory, you connect with families and homes. Like, I do that based on relationships. But how do we do that as a system? Systemically, and how do we structure that?
Well, so this is why storytelling is important. Yeah. Devon, if you look like you and Ardavan, your journey, like what we really need to and ought to be doing is speaking about the kind of relationships necessary to be able to do that. That's front and center. That is the most important thing in the equation, because and the other part is who are in the spaces that can that can look at prevention, and those cohorts, and so if it's a teacher, does that teacher understand the community? Does that teacher understand the dynamics that are play? Do they understand how to assess risk? And if they assess that there's a risk, do they know where to turn to help? Where do they turn to help? Like, that's or for help. Like, that's fundamental, because I don't know that people always understand that. So that's one thing I would say. Another thing I would say is that we need to have honest conversations in community. And my job, like a lot, is going and listening to that, so I can and take information and to be really honest about it in the spaces that I can to do that. But we need to make sure the information flow is there. I think the third thing is that we need to learn from the whole spectrum. So to be able to look at the prevention side, and I'm sure you experience this. How many times have you experienced a violent, very violent incident, like a shooting happens in community, and you're doing your work, you're connecting with community members, and someone's like, yeah, something was off. Like, I knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, all the time.
Say something, like, and let's do something about it, right? And so, the same question you gave me earlier is like, this is urgent.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, so I think that everyone's philosophy on, something was off. Like, we need to be able to make sure that they know how to assess what was off and where to turn to for help, and that it's okay to turn to somewhere for help. Because then if we don't, you have people working in boxes. The fourth thing I would say is the family. Like, a lot of our interventions focus on the young person without the context of the family environment.
Yeah.
And we really need to prioritize that and bring it into the center of the work. Yeah. I could go on all day about this one. I'll leave it there because we have a limited time for the podcast.
But on how do you handle the resistance? Because doing this work from an equity lens, from an anti-Black racism lens, there's going to be folks who just don't believe that type of approach. So how do you sit in a meeting when you do receive those resistance? What has been your rebuttal to try to get people to understand and look at the bigger picture?
It depends in the context. It's a great question, Arvind. Resistance comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, right? So there could be lack of understanding, and sometimes it's about building awareness. I find that no matter how much the social service system tries to educate about what's available or the programs available, that sometimes people aren't receiving that information for whatever reason, or it's not delivered to them in an accessible way. So that's one.
That's a great point.
That's one element. But then the other, the resistance comes because there's certain people that may want things to stay the same for all sorts of reasons, and across all sorts of dynamics. It could be people who work in the sector. It could be, because that's their livelihood. It could be people that are profiting from the experience. There's people who, can oppress communities by design, outside of the context of any of us. Going back to the social media thing, someone really ought to look at who's funding some of these things, and and who's benefiting from the kind of violence that is playing out and becoming just like known behavior where there's lots of different reasons. And I think the resistance. I think the one thing that everyone just needs to get to a place where none of us are right and none of us have the answer, but the scope of the individuals involved have the potential to take a step. And if we take that step and we learn from it, we can take another. That's how we're gonna get there. And then I think if we're depending on the resistance, because sometimes the resistance. I'm not going to be claimed to be right. I need to listen to folks like you and community members and build the interventions off of that, and build my advocacy and the conversations based on that. But if I have an idea, I may or may not be right. I just got to bring it forward, and we got to figure it out together. And I think people got to be okay with that. They don't need to be perfect. And they don't have the answer. It's no one entity in this equation, can respond to the complexity and sometimes urgency, using Devon's language from earlier, of this issue. And unless people are going to actually be authentic about that, and not just want to put their own agenda forward, then it'll always be a back and forth. But I think, you need people and need leaders that are grounded, that can actually bring people together, bring ideas together, and action them without being too worried about the noise.
Well said, Scott. Well said. And I mean, and for us, that's the way we work. But I mean, to Arvind's point, just a level of political expediency. Right, where you're now navigating government that is not their mandate. That is not their mandate. This level of advocacy is not entrenched in their deliverables, right? So it does add a level of complexities to what's taking place.
And I think this is through our partnership, right? Mm-hmm. Through the work we're doing, you're leading in towards peace and that we're supporting, and the youth violence prevention programs and anything else that we partner on. Mm-hmm. The next step that we need to take together is that's a role that the municipal government is set up to do. So, you work in a city, your work is within a city. If you talk to any of the other municipalities across the province of Ontario, they have a different agreement with the provincial government, and they're represented in a different way, where the City of Toronto is a direct agreement by law with the provincial government. And so when we publish council reports, although again, not the most exciting things to read sometimes, we make those asks, and we also have intergovernmental relations at a staff level. And so this is where it's like, none of us can do it alone. I'm not going to claim that I could come in and run your classroom, because I can't. I could come in and learn in your classroom 100%. And, I could give suggestions about ways that we could mobilize city services to support that. And, you're going to have interactions with other levels of government, as you should, and be able to facilitate those conversations. But there's another layer of where a partner like me can add to that in a way that you can't. And so we have to just be very clear about that, and make sure that we're arming each other with, here's the raw realities and the urgency, and what can we collectively do about it, without worrying about who's in the lead of it. Because at the end of the equation is the most important, folks, is the community.
The impact.
And that's where our focus has to be. And, all the other dynamics and show around, who's at the lead and who's at the helm and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. We just need to get past that, because there's a lot of great work happening in this city that we just need to keep championing and, for our point of view, shine the light on.
Yeah, and that's a strength-based approach to doing the work, right? That we know is more effective than the other approach. So we got time for about 2 more questions.
I think one more. We've got to wrap it up, bro.
Okay, one more. All right. So going back to the point you made earlier, you talked about the importance of stories, or even what type of stories we center. I think we're always trying to do this work both qualitatively and quantitatively, because you connect with different audiences, right? Devon always shares many stories of students he had. Some, they were able to become successful, and some weren't able to overcome the vulnerability and the risk factors they experienced. But providing the numbers and statistics also becomes a tool for advocating and advocacy, right? And I know SafeTO really tries to leverage data and evidence-based approaches to really measure its effectiveness, even incorporating that efficacy piece with towards peace of, after 1 year, how many people have we supported, in what ways. And at YAAACE, we've tried to do that with the recent launch of the Center for Community Safety and Roots of Violence, focusing on the risk factors for homicide, victimization, and perpetration, particularly with that disproportionality within the Black community and low-income communities. So in your work, how do you try to merge the qualitative and the quantitative? Because I feel like, obviously, City Council would love numbers in some capacities. We just had a budget passed, and sometimes people have to center their story to make their issue a priority. And that's kind of like, how do you control the narrative? So how do you try to merge the qualitative and the quantitative in your projects?
So, as I said earlier, SafeTO is a plan. Yeah. It's an overarching umbrella strategy, essentially, which there's a number of interventions underneath. It's not a program, but it's a plan. And you're playing a role in advancing it. We have initiatives that are playing a role in advancing it. One of those initiatives is now what is called the SafeTO Collaborative Analytics and Learning Environment, or the acronym SCALE. And SCALE's core function is about measurement. And so, and this is where I deeply respect you. Devon cited off some statistics earlier. Your online activity is telling that story. And so from a system point of view, the Toronto Police Service does great work with data. Toronto Public Health does great work with data. The city does great work with data. School boards does great work with data. it's never been interconnected in our city's history.
Silos.
So the SafeTO collaborative analytics and learning environment is actually working to bring that together. But in a way where it's not just about, linking the data sets. It's about a couple of things. So how do we do data linkage? How do we use advanced analytics in a number of different ways with our data to advance prevention? So that's like a core function. The next phase, because similar to what I said earlier, we had to build some infrastructure that enables the kind of collaboration. And we've had active conversations about data. And so the next phase is, Dr. Tanya Sharp, who is one of your other panelists, is going to be leading some community-based research on behalf of the SafeTO collaborative analytics and learning environment. We're working with academic partners at the Dalalana School of Public Health Population Health Analytics Lab. So on our end, we've been creating the infrastructure to do a couple things. One, visualize data so that communities can access the data and use it to develop preventative-based programs and use evidence upfront. But in order to do that, the next phase is for us to build the capacity of community to access that data and use that data for the purposes of developing and prioritizing preventative-based programming. So that's kind of how we're doing it. And then the third part is storytelling. And working with communities and empowering with communities to develop localized content, which I'm doing right now. You're already doing it. I'm sitting on a set here at YAAACE, and we got a cool Kofi painting, some cool stuff on the wall. That's it. And for us as a city to really, validate the data with community, action the data with community, and tell the story about what's actually happening in communities, and for good and for bad. We talk about incidents, we talk about that stuff, but we're not talking about how many kids are in your school. We're not talking about, how many young people are being engaged by game changers today, or the Justice Center, or everything else. And so to create a centralized place about this is the real story of community safety and well-being in Toronto. And that's what we're trying to do with scale.
Sounds good. And as it relates to scale, would organizations have access to the data that scale would generate?
Yeah, we're going to make it available. So we're going to make available like integrated data sets.
That'd be great.
That's the idea. And so we're just not there yet, but we're going to start engaging on how we get there. We had to build the infrastructure to get people to be able to share data across institutions. So it's not being analyzed in silos, number one. And then number two is to bring the folks together to start building the infrastructure that we can now build something that is connected to community.
Yes, that's awesome, because numbers don't lie. And if we can, data sets allow you to speak from a very informed, measured point of view, as opposed to being random, as opposed to being just making it up as you go, which a lot of entities do.
100%.
Or in government, they try to tell you this not happening. Yes, it is. Look, so numbers are a powerful aspect. And analysis is, at YAAACE, our values starts with analysis. It starts with awareness. It starts with, and there's some of the content stuff we're talking about, a documentary podcast. It starts with accountability. It starts with advocacy, action, and access. So those are the perimeters, and those are the pillars in which we stand. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's why I respect you guys so much, and you'll always have an ally with me.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Jay-Z said, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. And on that note, we really appreciate you. We can go on forever. We're going to bring you back next season because the conversation is rich, and we really appreciate you coming.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here as always.
Respect your
I was in your space before it was even set up, so I'm grateful to be here, and keep going.
Yeah, we look forward to building together.
We need you in the city. Keep going.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for listening. Tune in next time for some further great conversation with other guests who are leaders in the community and come with lived experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.